Breaking news: as Israel commits to prolonging the war, prospects for a truce seem bleak. Countless lives are being lost in Gaza as time passes. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel is coming under increasing pressure from around the world. Meanwhile, regular Israelis are becoming increasingly vocal about their displeasure with the course of the deadliest war against Hamas, a Palestinian militant group. But as the year comes to a close, it's still not clear if the various factors will even temporarily halt the fighting, which is causing a huge human cost, undermining American support globally, and could impact American elections next fall. With one of the most intense bombing campaigns in modern warfare adding to the grim tally, the death toll in Gaza surpassed 20,000 on Friday. Nearly two-thirds of the Palestinians killed were children and women, according to the UN, in response to a cross-border attack by the militant group Hamas on October 7, an attack that killed at least 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and abducted about 240 hostages, many of whom are still held in Gaza. Israel began its brutal campaign to eradicate Hamas. According to the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu expressed his determination to continue the war until all its objectives are met during a phone call with President Biden on Saturday, adding to Israel's recent defiance of American demands to reduce civilian casualties. Additionally, Netanyahu aimed to present the Biden administration's decision not to veto a UN Security Council resolution demanding more aid be allowed into Gaza as a demonstration of solidarity, even though it was widely perceived as an unusual public rebuke of Israel. Following the phone call, the Prime Minister's office stated that Netanyahu had expressed his appreciation for the United States' position on the resolution, which did not demand a ceasefire but did call for unhindered humanitarian aid to Gaza. During his brief remarks outside the White House, Biden remained more subdued, stating that he had a private discussion with the Israeli leader but did not ask for a truce. After many days of talks, the United States succeeded in having the language of the Security Council resolution weakened such that it did not include a request for a ceasefire. Urgent calls for a cessation of hostilities have grown domestically, including among Biden's Democratic base 11 months ahead of a tight presidential election and among numerous U.S. allies. As a result, the Biden administration's staunch support of Israel has weakened slightly, even though the United Nations resolution passed on Friday was well received. Aid groups felt it was severely inadequate. Due to the Israeli military assault, hundreds of thousands of Gazans have been forced to flee their homes, and many of them are suffering from malnutrition, disease, and lack of access to clean water. The International Rescue Committee has deemed the silence on the need for a ceasefire as unjustifiable. We reiterate that the only way fully to protect Palestinian lives, enable a sufficient humanitarian response and offer the best chance of hostage release is to stop to the fighting, the IRC stated, echoing many other organizations. The United States decided to abstain in Friday's vote, reversing its opposition to multiple similar resolutions. U.S. Vetoes of ceasefire and non-condemnation measures following the October 7 Hamas attack had left the country isolated prior to that vote. A current ceasefire would enable the militant group to reorganize and restock, according to the Biden administration and Israel. This would leave Hamas's leadership in place. Today, this council provided a glimmer of hope among a sea of unimaginable suffering, stated Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the United States ambassador to the United Nations, upon the measure's approval on Friday. Today, this council demanded immediate action to assure safe, unimpeded, and expanded humanitarian access and to establish conditions for a lasting end to hostilities. When the United States would not budge, the other members of the Security Council were understandably irate. The last time the United States did not support Israel at the United Nations was in the final days of Obama's administration, when Samantha Power, the UN ambassador at the time, abstained from voting to approve a resolution that declared Jewish settlements in the West Bank illegal. The Israeli government and several Republicans, including the soon-to-be President Trump, were outraged by the move, even though it was consistent with decades of U.S. policy and international law. But today, not even a short-term truce has been granted. A month has passed since the previous interim truce was initiated. During that week-long ceasefire, Israeli forces released over 100 hostages in exchange for nearly 3 times as many Palestinian prisoners. Efforts to facilitate a new exchange have fallen through. Hamas recently turned down an Israeli offer to temporarily halt fighting once again in exchange for the release of additional hostages, and over 100 hostages remain in Gaza. The relatives of the captives are becoming increasingly desperate in their demands for a ceasefire. Thousands of loved ones and supporters gathered under umbrellas on a windy and rainy Saturday night in Tel Aviv, pleading with the government to find a way to free their relatives. Listener Sivan Cohen-Sabin made it clear that they would keep going until everyone got back. Every single one of them, she said. The hostage situation is still a sore spot for Israel. An ongoing global outcry ensued after Israeli forces accidentally killed 3 hostages inside Gaza on December 15. The soldiers involved will face discipline according to the Israeli military, who claimed they broke the rules of engagement. The 3 young men who tragically lost their lives were attempting a dramatic signal to Israeli forces, emerging from hiding while shirtless and brandishing a homemade flag. They had gone so far as to try to warn the army of their presence by scrawling a Hebrew message on a building's wall, identifying the victims of the October 7 Hamas-led massacres and those who have died in captivity since has become a somber ritual that Israel continues to perform. A 73-year-old man named Gadi Haggai, who is a dual citizen of Israel and the U.S., passed away recently. Israeli officials announced on Friday that despite his death in the attack on his kibbutz in southern Israel, his body is still being held by militants in Gaza. Relatives of the 300 American citizens, green card holders, or close relatives who are still stuck in Gaza are desperately trying to free them, according to the State Department. The Israeli military has repeatedly stated its aim of dismantling Hamas capabilities, but after 11 weeks of fighting, it appears that this objective is still a long way off. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar seems to be unharmed and at large despite the fact that the Israeli army has seized and destroyed at least one of his homes and claimed to have killed multiple senior commanders of the group. The war has produced a political conundrum in Israel, where surveys reveal that the majority of Israelis still back the war effort, despite their lack of faith in Netanyahu's leadership during the conflict. Many are skeptical that he will really prioritize the return of captives or that his declared goal of crushing Hamas is even possible. Also, if Israel doesn't heed international calls for a truce or a permanent end to the fighting, it might lose out on an opportunity to negotiate with Hamas and free the hostages. It's decision time, penned former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert in an opinion piece published last week in Haaretz. A voluntary end to hostilities involving live hostages, or an imposed end to hostilities involving dead ones.